And we're live. Hello. My name is Brandon Coles. I'm the creator of a Facebook group called In Memory and Honor of DeForest Kelley. Today we're going to talk with Kristine Smith, DeForest Kelley's personal assistant. DeForest played Dr. McCoy on Star Trek. That's what he's best known for. And we're joined.
Go ahead.
And we're joined with by Todd Gwynn from the Facebook group, Jim Westbrook from the Facebook group too. Let's go ahead and start doing questions. I got the Q&A app up. So I'll start with my first question. Would you tell us about? We can hear you, Jim. Would you like to tell? Is that me?
You may be getting an echo or something. Do you have the YouTube page open? Close your YouTube page because it's.
I got it.
Okay.
I got it. Okay. Sorry about that. Would you tell us about Wenatchee, Washington, on May 4th, 1968?
Yes, Wenatchee, Washington is the very first time I met Dee. I found out he was going to be in a parade in Wenatchee, the Apple Festival parade, like 2 days before he went. And I was a brand new driver, totally scared. The idea of driving to a big town from the little town of Cle Elum scared me half to death. So I asked a friend to go along. My mom and dad were seeding the field. They could not get away that day. And they said, "You can take yourself." And I went, "Yeah, all right." So I got a friend to go along. We made some signs. We got some autograph books. We went over to Wenatchee, parked immediately, so I didn't have to drive any farther than I needed to go. And we headed over toward the parade route, and as luck would have it, the limousine that was going to be carrying Dee and Carolyn was parked alongside the street there at a hotel. And I thought, if I just sit and loiter shamelessly, I might be able to actually see them and speak to them, not just watch them go by in the parade route. So we did that. We hung around for 10 or 15 minutes, and pretty soon Dee and Carolyn came out and got into the car. And I had met other actors before, and usually they're so full of themselves you're just not really sure if you're going to like them. So I was a little hesitant. I stood back and watched how he interacted with the other fans for quite a while, because I didn't want to be disappointed, actually. So I watched, and he was just such a gracious, awesome human being that I finally screwed up enough courage to ask him if I could have his autograph. And he said, absolutely, and we shared a few words. And in that brief period of time, I realized what a true gentleman and what a truly appreciative human being he was. And on the way home from Wenatchee that day, I knew there was a creative writing assignment due in our class. So I thought, I will write an article about meeting DeForest Kelley. And I wrote an article for creative writing called, are you ready for this? The Real McCoy. And the teacher liked it so well that he said, that is really a great article. Why don't you send it to Mr. Kelley? And I'm like, oh, no, I don't write to movie stars. And he said, well, look, if you impress somebody obviously as much as he impressed you, wouldn't you want to know? And I went, yeah, but he's an actor. He probably hears it 10 times a day. He basically just pulled rank on me and said, send it. And I knew I was going to get marked down in citizenship or whatever. The teachers can mark you down and if you don't do what they say. So I sent it, and I thought, his secretary will see it. She'll throw it away. I mean, what are you worried about? As it turned out, Carolyn, his wife, was his secretary, and she showed it to him, and she said, Dee, you have got to see this. And he read it, and they liked it so much that they gave it to Pat Langdon, who was Leonard Nimoy's Girl Friday, and she sent it off to TV Star Parade. And TV Star Parade liked it so much that they asked if they could use it for a special holiday piece that year at Christmas time. So, I mean, to have my writing career launched by my favorite actor, my parents had to peel me off the ceiling. I was just so excited. And, of course, I worried the whole 6 months before it came out because I thought, they're going to change it. I'm this kid living in the sticks. What do I really know about writing? I thought they would completely rewrite it. And as it turned out, they didn't change anything. So Dean congratulated me and encouraged me to continue writing, and that's how it started. 33 years later, I ended up as his caregiver and his personal assistant at the end of his life. So it was a long, long journey. It was an awesome journey, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, other than the fact Dee told me that I could, was that Terry Rio, who wrote Dee's biography, From Sawdust to Stardust, From Sawdust to Stardust, there we go, the biography of Star Trek's Dr. McCoy, asked me a question that I couldn't answer. And the question was, how did you go from becoming a fan on the outermost reaches of fandom to being at his bedside when he passed away? And I went, that's something Dee would have had to answer. And she goes, you know the answer, you just have to connect the dots. And because I was a writer and I had all of these journals, I was able to go back into my journals and just actually, I had written down the whole thing all the way through, and so I was able to do that. I didn't know if I'd even have a 100-page book, but after I'd gone through all my journals, I had about 850 pages, and we had to decide what should come out of the book, because you wouldn't have been able to lift it otherwise. But that's how I met him for the very first time. And it started me on this long, career in the Star Trek world.
Okay. The next question comes from John Bauer Sox, I think is how you said it.
Uh-huh.
Can you please talk about DeForest Kelley's military career? Did he ever see action?
He did not. He started out, they were going to make him a tail gunner, which is, that's a very short career if you're a tail gunner. You usually don't live very long. He was in Roswell, New Mexico, and he was helping land planes in Roswell, New Mexico, and he heard from a gentleman there that they needed an artist. And he went, wow, I'm an artist. And so he quickly drew a picture of a young guy smoking a cigarette, and they said, wow, you are pretty good. It might have been the only thing Dee ever drew, but it was really good. He said, well, go on over into the wherever and sign up. And he went over there, and it turned out that they needed him in Culver City, which is, they called it Fort Roach Studios during World War II. Clark Gable was there, Jimmy Stewart was there, a lot of people were there, and they were actually writing, producing, directing, and acting in the war movies that told people how to survive plane crashes, how to survive in, enemy territory and all kind of stuff like that. So also Dee was involved because he was artistic. He was involved in, they opened up this huge sound stage in Culver City, and they did a topographical map of Japan. And they built it so that they could fly a camera over the top of this thing so that they could show what the approach to Japan would be like when they were going to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. So he was actually involved in painting that topographical map. He was thanked very, very many times after the war, even though he didn't serve in the war. A lot of the pilots who flew into Hiroshima said that if it hadn't been for the absolute accuracy of the maps they had created there, that it was like they were just flying over that place. It was, when they were actually going in, it was like they were flying over the map. It was so accurate. And Dee appeared in a lot of those Navy training films too. So that's where he spent his life. He actually got an awful lot of his acting chops during World War II, writing and acting and producing radio shows and motion pictures to help military people survive various military action situations.
What did you think about the bombing?
As the son of a Baptist minister, I don't think anybody was, extremely excruciatingly happy about that. But since the end of the war, I guess it did what it was supposed to do. He had a lot of friends, his brother, he had a lot of friends who did see action in the war. They came back, devastated, psychologically damaged. He was grateful he didn't have to go there, but he also was forever, for the rest of his life, a huge military supporter and advocate, because he said the things those people saw while they were out really ruined a lot of their lives. It was hard for them to come home, and they didn't get debriefed like they do nowadays, and there was just a lot of psychological damage for the rest of their lives. And he just always had a huge heart for the military, for veterans. after that point when he saw so many of his friends go and come back like nothing like they had been when they left.
Was he already an actor when he was doing these sort of training films, or was that how he got into that sort of thing?
No, actually, before he got into the military, he came out to California to visit an uncle of his who was a draftsman, but he was also on the side. He was running gambling halls. So Dee comes from being this Baptist minister's upright son to helping his uncle in these gambling halls at night. And he said, that's when I knew right then, no, we're not going to be doing that with our lives. But he did find out he was lying on the beach in Long Beach one day, and a talent scout named Ron Hawk came by and looked at him and said, you're a good-looking guy. He said, would you like to be in the movies? And Dee had this thick Georgia accent. He said, yeah, whatever he said, yes, sir. And he said, well, we're going to have to do something about that, about his accent. So he sent him to a woman. Her last name was Day. I wish I could remember what her full name was. He sent Dee to her to work on the accent. Dee started, and she told him, start acting in the Long Beach theater group down there. That's where he met Carolyn. They were both actors in the Long Beach theater group. And he said, just go down there and get your chops. Just act as much as you can. Get into as many of those as you possibly can, and learn the craft, which he did. And then at that point, Paramount was very interested. Bill Michael John at Paramount was very interested because the talent scout came down, spotted them again, and said, yeah, he's good. Let's bring him up for a screen test. That's at about the point that the war interrupted, and he got sent back to Roswell, and then he got brought back quickly to Culver after that. Oh, there's a story that happened in Roswell, New Mexico, and it's not about aliens. But when he was directing traffic, he was a traffic controller for airplanes coming in and out of the field there. He said there was one point where he doesn't know if they were messing with him or what, but he almost landed one plane on top of another. He was supposed to be the air traffic controller. One came down and he realized another was coming down almost on top of him, and they very narrowly, avoided this horrendous collision. And when he told me about this like 50 years later in the hospital, he was still in tears. It scared him so badly that he said, boy, if you don't believe I was the best traffic control officer after that, you just don't even imagine. I was so hyper aware after that incident. And he said, again, he doesn't know if they did that to him on purpose or if it really was a foul up, but scared the living bejesus out of him. So I guess that's it. Did I answer the question? Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
The next question comes from Dan Madison from the official Star Trek fan club. Can you share Dee and Carolyn's love of the roses?
Oh, absolutely. Dee and Carolyn must have had 80 roses, probably rose bushes, probably 30 in the front and 50 in the back. They just absolutely loved their roses, and they gave them out to everybody that they knew, because they knew that they brought joy to everybody who had them. Dee was out there an awful lot. Tony Kirk, his mail carrier, one time came by and for some reason was, I guess, looking at the mail and not watching where he was walking, and he ended up in the rose bushes. Tangled up in the rose bushes. Dee said, he heard this going on, and Tony Kirk, by the way, was a Navy SEAL, so I'm sure that what was coming out of his mouth was nothing, pleasant. But Dee walked out the door, and he sees Tony Kirk wrapped up in his rose bushes, and he said, I just put on my Dr. McCoy thing, my Dr. McCoy persona, and said, what are you doing to my roses? Instead of, are you okay? And yeah, they love their roses. Dan, if you are there, and if we can hear you, I don't know how much time you have with us today. Did you want to talk about your experiences with Dee and Carolyn? I don't know how much time you have, and I want to jump in here if you have the opportunity and you have to go.
I think
He hasn't actually made it into the Hangout yet.
Oh, he hasn't. Okay,
Yeah.
he's working on it. Mark is mentioning me. Okay, let me see. Okay, Mark is on. Mark is watching me now. Do you have a microphone, Mark? Can you get on here and talk about your experiences with D?
He's not actually in the Hangout either, but he can see you on YouTube.
Here's the link to send him. It's in the chat.
I've got the link. Let me
Private message that to him.
I will. And you can ask me a question while I'm doing that, I think.
Okay. What's your DeForest's favorite movie that you have?
The movie that he's in that I like the best?
Yes.
Strangely enough, it's either I'm going to say it is The Voyage Home, the one with the movie with the whales, but I really loved him as a cowboy. I just totally loved him as a cowboy. He was such a bad guy, and he was the gentlest soul on the planet that you could ever meet. He deserved an Oscar for those performances he did as a bad guy. But there are two particular performances that he did. One was in Apache Uprising, where he played Toby Jack Saunders, and there's another one where he doesn't have a lot of words, he doesn't have a lot of words, but it was called The Law and Jake Wade. And just watching him glower in the background was scary. You could have nightmares about that. And one of the reasons Gene Roddenberry didn't get him right away for Star Trek is the networks did not believe anybody would believe DeForest Kelley as a bad guy. They said, as a good guy. They said he has been a heavy forever in Westerns, and they're not going to buy this guy as a good guy. Well, Gene Roddenberry had screened a pilot he did with Dee, where Dee played a criminologist, and they went, maybe they will. But one of the reasons he wasn't in either of the first two pilots is the NBC was just backpedaling like crazy. They did not think Dee would belong or fit into Star Trek because everybody would not believe him as a good guy. Well, as we all know, that was wrong. And after Star Trek, he couldn't get into any bad guy roles again, because then he really was typecast. Anybody who sees Dee now in any of his cowboy roles says to him, "Oh, there's Dr. McCoy." Well, Dr. McCoy didn't even exist when he did those cowboy roles. So yeah, he got typecast in the other way, but the studio thought he had already been typecast as a badass cowboy, and that nobody would ever believe him as a good guy.
It's good Gene Roddenberry saw him when he did. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. He put him in a pilot called Police Story, not the one that actually got on TV, and then he did an earlier one called 333 Montgomery, where Dee played a criminal defense attorney named Jake Ehrlich, and that was based on a true guy. And Jake Ehrlich is the one who actually picked DeForest Kelley to portray him, because he said, "That's the guy I want portraying me." Dee was a great actor. There was a dear friend of theirs who they'd known since he was 18 years old, and she told him at one point, there's no way I'm ever going to watch any of your Westerns. And he said, "Why not? Why wouldn't you watch my Westerns?" And she said, "Well, I just would never believe you as a bad guy. I just couldn't. I would never be able to divorce myself from what a good guy you are." And he immediately turned to her, grabbed the front of her blouse, and went into a badass cowboy thing with her. Scared her so bad she started crying. And then he started crying because he didn't want to scare her. He just wanted to prove he could do it. And it just scared her half to death. And he was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." So yeah, he could really, if you haven't seen him in Westerns, you need to go see Apache Uprising, The Law and Jake Wade, and then there's another one he was also in. Did you know he was in The Gunfight at OK Corral? He was a good guy in that one.
Yes.
There was a You Are There episode where he was a bad guy. Ike Clanton, you can look that one up on YouTube. And then he was in a movie called Warlock with Anthony Quinn and Henry Fonda and who else? Anyhow. And there he portrayed a good guy on who had fallen in with the wrong group. He wasn't really a bad guy. but he was doing some pretty tacky things because he was in with the wrong group. At the end of the movie, I considered him the hero because he actually helped the good guy win the battle at the end. But
Best
that's
kind of
another
good
really
guy
good
has
one,
problem.
and that's called Warlock. Okay? What
Uh,
did you say, Todd?
I say the best kind of good guy has problems. It's a
That's
deeper
right.
character.
And they asked me, people who knew him said, how were you able to portray somebody so alien to your character, to be a bad guy like that? And he said he knew a sheriff in Georgia growing up, and he just knew, he said, that guy stood on the corner waiting for somebody to step out of line so he could kill him. And he just had that look of a snake. And he said, I just channeled that guy as best I could because he was just like, my God, that guy is going to kill. He can't wait. He has itchy trigger finger. He cannot wait to kill somebody. So he channeled him to get the bad guys. And he did a really good job. I had a nightmare about that portrayal one time. Okay?
welcome to the Hangout, Caitlin from Wisconsin. She's a
Hi,
Kelly
Caitlin.
fan.
Welcome, Caitlin.
Mark Lee says, I remember Dee and Carolyn's house as being yellow. Did any other Hollywood actor own it before they bought it?
I do not believe so. They bought it in 1964 or 62 before Star Trek. It cost them $24,000 back then. And they were, they were struggling actors before Star Trek came along. He was always trying to worry about, how to keep the roof on the, when the roof went bad, how are we going to fix the roof and stuff like that. So Star Trek really was the first time in his long career. He started in 46, not 66. That was the first time in his career where he actually made enough as an actor to actually keep things together there. He was bouncing between TV and motion pictures, which was very rare back then. A lot of motion picture actors would not touch television. They thought it would, like, lower their status or something. And Dee was like, okay, I'm starving. I don't care where I go. Just put some food on the table here. I will go wherever you send me. And so he was a starving actor for a long, long time. So one of the reasons he was so appreciative was when Star Trek came along, finally they had food on the table, for sure. And the other thing was he was just raised right. He was an appreciative person his entire life. He never lost that. He was absolutely an awesome human being in that way.
Well, what was his favorite food?
I know on January 1st every year there is a tradition in the South where you do black-eyed peas and help me, Todd.
You put pepper
ham and black-eyed
sauce.
peas? Huh?
Oh, you have to put ham hocks in there to season
Ham
them, of
hocks,
course.
okay.
But people usually put this chili sauce on it. It's a vinegar that's been infused with peppers.
Yeah,
on black
well,
eyed
anyhow,
peas.
Dee actually cooked that every single year on January 1st. I don't know what his favorite food was, but I do know that was one of his traditional foods. He would absolutely do that every year on January 1st. So,
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Tell us about Dee's humor.
About Dee's humor, he had a dry sense of humor. It was never cruel. Gee, I don't know. Beyond that, it was very dry, and it was never cruel. I'll give you an example. He was often asked at Star Trek conventions, I hear, William Shatner can be kind of like a human hemorrhoid once in a while, And he says, hey, I love Bill. I absolutely love Bill. He says, I've had to straighten his ass out a time or two, but I love him, So, and you saw the thing at the Shrine 25th anniversary thing where Dee led with a story that he knew Shatner was going to lead with because Shatner had pulled a trick on him, had stolen his muffins out of the toaster. There were 2 left. While they were making a movie, there were 2 left. Dee had put it in the toaster. He turned around for a minute for the makeup man to fix his makeup, and when he came back, Shatner had them both in his mouth, chewing them. And he said, I'm going to get even with you for that. And so he waited for the 25th anniversary at the Shrine Auditorium, And he said, I knew Shatner was going to lead with the muffin story, so I went out and told it first because it was my story too. I just told it from my point of view. Well, as he was telling it, Shatner's backstage losing his cool. I was going to tell that story. He knew I was going to tell that story. So Dee went off stage. Shatner came on stage and starts telling, like Dee says, nailing me to the cross, just crucifying me. He's talking about how old I am and this, that, and the other thing. I was there too. I was feeling awful because he really was. He was making Dee sound like he was an addle-pated old fool, and he certainly wasn't. He was sharp as a tack. But Dee's backstage with Leonard, and he says, man, if I had one of those hooks, I would go get him. And the stage manager said, Mr. Kelley, I have one. And he said, get it. And he says to Leonard, come with me. And Leonard goes, oh no, you do this by yourself. So Dee goes out there with his hook, and it's 20 feet long, and it has like a gig at the end. It has a pointed thing at the end. He said, I know I had to be careful because Shatner was looking the other way, and I didn't want to really hurt him or stab him. So I go walking out there. Shatner turns around and sees me and, raises a ruckus, and he goes running back off stage, and Shatner turns to the audience and says, see, I told you. He forgot what he came out here for. So anyhow, Dee had this wonderful sense of humor, and he would have been a great comedy actor. He did a play called, I can't remember what the play was called. Anyhow, in Lubbock, Texas, and the gentleman who directed it, Phil Whalen, said he had the same timing as Jack Benny. He absolutely nailed comedy. And I think that's why he was so good as McCoy, too, because he had lines that weren't necessarily funny, but some of them were, but they're just the way he said them made them very special and powerful.
Would you like to talk about Oktoberfest? It's in one of your books.
About Oktoberfest?
Yeah, Trekfest.
There was an October
Trekfest
festival,
yeah.
Yes. And we went there, and that's such a long story. Gee, Brandon, I mean that could take up the rest of my half hour, I think, here if we do that one. Let's save that for the anniversary. The book's coming out again in 2016. That's an awful long story. Okay,
Paul asked, how did Kelley feel about the next generation compared to the classic series?
Dee said he watched the first few episodes of it, and he said it was really hard for him to watch it because, first of all, it was something they had done. He thought the production values were awesome. He loved the cast. They were often doing Star Trek conventions together, but he said it was really hard for him to watch that show. Just because it was something they had done, and it felt like... Now I'm going to put words in Dee's mouth. I think what he was trying to say was, they had pulled it away from that cast before they were ready to let it go, in a way. However, they did do the movies with the original generation cast, and of course the fans were originally pretty upset too. It's like, hey, as long as the older crew wants to be making movies, we want to be going with the older crew. So you remember there was that tension between the two for a little while, but Dee did the pilot episode Encounter at Farpoint as the 137-year-old Admiral McCoy because he wanted to pay Gene back for his career. He loved everybody in the Next Generation. He hung with them. He had dinner with them. He did conventions with them, but he didn't really watch the Next Generation. I think it was just hard for him to do it.
Well, it was great to see him in that first episode, and just tying the two together like that was really enjoyable to me as a fan.
It was like passing the torch. It was awesome. And the neat thing about that 42 seconds that he had there was you started out laughing and you ended up almost crying. I mean, that transition between I don't see no points on you, boy, and at the end you treat her like a lady and she'll always bring you home. I mean, he took us through the complete gamut of emotions in 35 seconds, which showed what an incredible actor he was.
Would you like to talk about the Kelleys and Deacon, your Serval son?
Oh, Deacon was a serval that I had from the time he was 5 days old and fit into my hand until he was 17 and a quarter, which is when he passed away. And serval is an African wildcat about knee high. And Dee and Carolyn fell in love with Deacon before Deacon and I ever came to California. So when Deacon came to California, one of the first things Carolyn wanted to do was meet Deacon. And at this point, Deacon was up at Shambhala Preserve, Tippy Hedron's Wildlife Preserve, an awesome preserve. If you want to support an animal cause, that's the one to do it. Shambhala.org is where you go. But I took Dee and Carolyn to meet Deacon up at Shambhala, and Carolyn was in like a 2-year-old in a candy store. She was so excited to meet Deacon. Deacon knew it. I mean, it was like, this lady loves me. And he purred at her, and he licked her, and it was like, wow. Then Dee came in. Now, there weren't a whole lot of men in Deacon's life, because I'm unmarried, and most of the men he had seen were veterinarians. So when Dee walked in, Dee thought Dee was really a doctor, an animal doctor. So Deacon was like, who are you? I'm not sure I want to meet you. No, I really not sure I want to meet you. And Dee totally respected that and said, no, I don't want to meet him if he doesn't want to meet me. As time went on, and when Deacon got off the hill and got actually back into Encino, as soon as Deacon was home, off the hill and in his own environment, Dee and Carolyn came over, and Deacon fell all over them. He drooled in their hands and fell asleep in their arms. And one Christmas time, they actually put Deacon in their Christmas card and sent it off to everybody without an explanation. Carolyn said, that was the biggest mistake I ever made, because everybody said, where did you get that cat? What kind of a cat is it? So she said, not only did I have to send out 250 cards, I then had to send out 250 responses saying the cat was this, and this is where I got him. So, yeah, if you ever do anything wild like that in your Christmas cards, be sure and explain it, or you're going to end up sending many more Christmas cards or explanations. So they loved Deacon. When Deacon had to finally be put down, he had a stroke and was in problems. He had to be put down. Dee and Carolyn said, I want to pay for his cremation. And I went, oh, you guys. And they said, no, we want to do something, and this is what we decided to do. So they actually paid for his cremation. Oh, and Dee went out. This gives you a little bit of what kind of a human being Dee was. When I moved to California, of course, I had to be looking for a place to rent that would allow me to have a serval. So while Deacon was up at Tippy Hedron's Wildlife Shambhala Preserve, we were looking all over the San Fernando Valley, looking for a landlord who is willing to rent to a person with a wild cat. That's pretty scary. Liability issues and stuff like that. Dee and Carolyn, I kid you not, got in their vehicle and went around knocking on doors and actually found me somebody who would allow me to rent. I mean, it blew me away. Me, a total stranger, knocking on your door and saying, hey, I have a wild animal. Can I live here? The doors would have been slammed shut, because it was Dr. McCoy. I mean, he knew that he had that kind of clout. And he went out and he just used it in all the most wonderful ways to help people. So.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with DeForest Kelley's personal assistant, Kristine Smith. We have 8 viewers. We had 9 a minute ago. We appreciate you joining us. If you want to ask a question, submit it through the Q&A app. Eleanor wants to know, how close were you to Leonard Nimoy and Shatner?
I wasn't at all. I was, I knew Dee and Carolyn. I had been to the sets a few times and said hello to them. William Shatner came in when Dee was sick in the hospital and spent some time with him. But whenever that happened, I always left the room, because I figured they had things to talk about that I probably, maybe I would have put a crimp in their tail if I was sitting there. So I didn't really meet Leonard or Bill. I did spend some significant time with Nichelle Nichols, because she came out a couple of times to visit, and we went to dinner or lunch together. And when Dee received one of the 2 awards he received after he passed away, either the Golden Boot Award or the Gene Roddenberry Award, Walter Koenig picked it up for him, and Nichelle Nichols sang a song in my honor and in memory of Dee at that time. So Nichelle would know me. Walter might, but I don't believe Bill or Leonard probably would even remember me. Possibly, Carolyn said Dee was forever taking pictures of Deacon, my serval, to the studio to show them, so they might have known of me in relationship to my cat. But as far as being personal friends, no, I never was personal friends with them.
Caitlin asks, is it true that Mr. Kelley would always embarrass you up there on stage at conventions?
Not always, but he did a pretty good job of it pretty often. Yeah, he introduced me as Crazy Kris at the one in Los Angeles because I had written him a really funny letter and I had signed it Crazy Kris. And so he introduced me at Crazy Kris, and then the DeForest Kelley fan publication picked it up, and they carried it on, and so I was Crazy Kris at conventions for a number of years there. And I did a couple of Star Trek comedy routines too called, actually I posted one of those on your site, Brandon, called Husband Hunting on the Enterprise. I did a couple of stand-up routines that I'd written at 3 different conventions during the 90s in Oakland, Denver, and Baltimore.
The Facebook page Kristine's Mission is in memory and honor of DeForest Kelley. That's my little plug there.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. What is the effect of Kelley on your writing career and his effect on his fans?
Well, he launched my writing career, and he encouraged me all those years when it was a losing proposition. He always said, "You will make it. You will make it as a writer," and kept encouraging me. As far as his influence, his impact on his fans, did you say for the second part of that?
Yes, I did.
You know what? There are so many people probably tuning in right now that they are in the careers they are in because of D, and an awful lot of people went into medical careers either as doctors, nurses, technicians. There's a NASA space scientist named Linda Plush who got into it. There are just a lot of people. I called them mini McCoys running around hospitals and clinics now as a result of the inspiration to go out there and be a good doctor in the way McCoy was a good doctor, personable and almost the house call type of doctor. So his influence on fans, not just in the medical field or the scientific field, but his influence on anything his fans wanted to do, he was a really good encouragement to them. There was one gal who said she wanted to be an actress, and he said, "Oh my gosh, if you want to be an actress, if I had a daughter, I would probably try to talk you out of it, but by gosh, if that's your passion, do not ever give up on your passion. If you have a passion to do something in this world, you're here to do that thing, so go do it." And he was very good about encouraging people to do what they felt they were here to do.
Do you have any experiences with Myrtle the Turtle?
I do.
Kelley's pet?
Several times. Myrtle the Turtle was actually a desert tortoise, and he and Leonard got them the same year, sometime in the 66, 68 period, when they were both in the same TV show, Star Trek. And I guess Leonard's died. I guess Leonard's desert tortoise died, but Myrtle is, as far as I know, still going to this day. They live to be 120 years old. And Myrtle, almost any time I would go to visit the Kelleys, if it was either early morning or late afternoon, they would say, "You want to go feed Myrtle?" And of course, we would build her Waldorf salad and take it out to her. And she was really a great turtle, because if they forgot to feed her at 5, she would go over to the trash cans next to their house and just start rattling the trash cans. And it was like, "Okay, Myrtle's calling. We have to go feed her now." So she was really a trained, wonderful, awesome desert tortoise. She hibernated during the winter time. Even though they're in Southern California, she hibernated about 4 months out of the year. She had a hole, they called it her condo, a hole in the back of their yard, and then she would come out in the springtime and spend spring, summer, and fall with them, and then she would go ahead and hibernate and come back out again the next spring.
You said Myrtle's still alive. Where is she?
As far as I know, she is still alive. She went to a neighborhood kitty corner from where they lived on Greenleaf Street to a lady, and she told me she was going to contact me if ever she needed to find her a new home, and I haven't heard from her, so I'm presuming Myrtle is still doing quite well, or I would have heard from her.
Caitlin is asking, what would have Mr. Kelley wanted to tell me as a story first about his life? Like, whatever, if I were to ask him if he were still alive. Hold
what
on a
kind
minute.
of...
What I guess Caitlin is meaning. What story would Mr. Kelley tell her if they just first met each other
If they were to meet each other?
for the first time?
I think what he would do is probably almost mini interview her and find out what her interests were and pursue that with her, because he was very personable. He wanted to know about you. And if he did meet you, the neat thing about D was he could go into a convention and answer 50 questions in an hour, and if you met him 3 hours later, like there was one occasion where we were having a North Shore Animal League fundraiser at his fan club, and he and Carolyn surprised us by coming into this fan club meeting where there were like 35 or 40 people in the room. He remembered which question they had asked earlier in the day. Which question, and you asked the question about that, and you asked the question about that. I mean, that blew me away that he was paying that kind of much attention to absolutely identify which fan asked which question. He was
shows how conscientious he is.
Very conscientious, extremely conscientious, yes. So yeah, Caitlin, I don't know what he would ask you, because that's just one of those things that it would be so personalized and so individual that if I tried to tell you anything else, I'd be telling you fibs.
Thank you, Kris.
Uh-huh.
Would you tell us about the fortune teller in D?
Yeah. In the book From Sawdust to Stardust, Terry Rio's book about Dee's biography, she tells the story that Dee went to a fortune teller just for entertainment purposes when he was in his late 20s, and the fortune teller told him not much is going to happen to you until your late 40s, and he went pshaw, pshaw, pshaw. I'm going to be retired by the late 40s. I mean, he just brushed her off, and he said, as it turned out, that's exactly what happened. He became Dr. McCoy at age 48. Well, no, let's see, age 46. He portrayed Dr. McCoy from 46 to 48, and then until the end of his life almost. And that's exactly what happened. He did not become a household name or a solid working actor like full-time until Star Trek came along. So the fortune teller was right.
Would you like to talk about your visit to the set of Star Trek VI?
Okay. I was invited to the set of Star Trek VI along with some other fans, and we were told when we went there, now you don't stay more than 40 minutes. And I totally honor that, and I was like kind of in charge of being sure that happened. So we got there, and Dee was still in makeup, and the three major actors were still in makeup, but everybody else was pretty much hanging around the soundstage, and so we got to talk with Jimmy and Walter and have some, schmoozing going on with them. And then when Dee came on, he was dressed in that deer skin. You remember from Rurapenti?
Yes.
He's got that growth of beard and he's got the deer skin on. And he came over, and I looked at him. Remember, I have Deacon, this serval. And he comes over, and I went, Mr. Kelley, do you know what I'm going to have to tell Deacon about you? You were wearing animal skins. And Dee just went, oh, don't tell him. It's what they give me in wardrobe. And I said, it's okay. I won't tell him. It'll be okay. And then what surprised me about Dee was, as McCoy, as I had never seen him in uniform, even with a deerskin draped over him. And it blew me away how absolutely handsome he was in that Starfleet uniform, and his blue eyes shone from 30 feet away. And I just went, wow, good Lord, that guy is... I had never seen him as McCoy before. So it was like, in person as McCoy before. You have to remember, we see just like I'm seeing you now, Brandon or Todd, on this screen, you're seeing a flat, two-dimensional thing. You don't see yourself ever in three-dimension. Only other people see you in three-dimension. So to see McCoy in three-dimension, it was just like the first time I saw him at the Wenatchee Apple Festival Parade. The first time I saw him in 3D, I said, my God, he is so attractive. What do they do on Star Trek to make him look so, just like almost plain or rugged or whatever? so when I saw him in 3D as McCoy, it just like kind of took my breath away. I couldn't believe it. So anyhow, we hung around there for a while. They were doing, the 40 minutes came and started to go, and McCoy and Kirk and Spock headed down this corridor, and I said, gals, we got to leave. We just have to leave now. We've overextended our stay, and so we left. Dick calls me that night and said, why did you leave? I was just, the next scene was mine, and I went, well, I didn't know that, and B, they told us to stay 40 minutes, and I obey the rules, so I hope I get invited back sometime. So, yeah, he was very disappointed that we weren't there to watch him do that corridor scene. But we left. So
his eyes were really something else, weren't they? I noticed Roddenberry cast a lot of people with really dynamic eyes, really brilliant eyes.
Absolutely, yeah. I saw him at a convention in Denver. He did a TV interview called Midday Colorado, and they said that was the largest group ever in that studio. I mean, they had to, fit him in with a shoehorn because so many people came to watch him at that. And again, he came on stage there, and his eyes, I mean, you could see his blue eyes from, 40 feet away. He had Paul Newman blue eyes. Nobody really used, it looks like you do, too.
Yeah, maybe a little. Not as good as yours. Yours look better than mine.
So, he was pretty amazing.
Kristine,
yes.
Joseph is asking, can you tell us about his thoughts on appearing at conventions and the fans?
He loved conventions. He really did. I mean, he didn't have to do them. He had enough money. He could have stayed at home. But he loved his fans, and his fans loved him. And you know what? As far as I can tell, the DeForest Kelley fans are absolutely the cream of the crop fans of the whole world. He didn't have stalkers. When I went to a charity horse show that William Shatner had, organized, there was this phalanx of security guards, and I mean they were like Klingon security guards, not really Klingons, but they were serious security guards. They wouldn't let me anywhere near D. I mean, they were just like dedicated to keeping fans away from, well, you know what? I figured out later, Shatner and Nimoy had fans who were stalkers, and they were in constant, danger, unfortunately. And so anytime D appeared with them, it was real hard to get to him. At that charity horse show, Carolyn wasn't able to go, and she said, well, go ahead and, let Dee know you're there. So I bought a little bunny rabbit that I was going to give to Dee to give to Carolyn and say, somebody missed you tonight, and it was me, just a little bunny to give to her. They wouldn't let me anywhere near Dee, nowhere near Dee. And Dee kept looking around like he was looking for me, and every time I would try to, catch his eye, the security guards would be in front of me, and it was like, wow, these guys are really serious about keeping us out. And then finally Dee left the security area and came up and said, Kris, there you are, I've been looking all over for you. And at that point the security guards let me through. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people say, well, maybe Shatner and Nimoy are standoffish. I don't think they're necessarily standoffish. I think they have really good security and for good reasons. Dee never, to my knowledge, ever had to worry about that kind of thing. The people who were attracted to him were attracted to his gentleness and his kindness. And he almost got in trouble one time because the affections that the fans had for him was so all-encompassing and over-empowering that they almost pushed him up against the wall one time and the table up against him, and that scared him. But it wasn't because like somebody was out to get him. It was just he could have accidentally been hurt by their love. But he didn't have anybody out like stalking him. So that's one way that Dee was able to really interact with his fans. I think interact with his fans really a lot better than the others were able to.
That's good. Well, why didn't you just throw the bunny at him?
Pardon?
Why didn't you just throw the bunny at him?
I thought about that. I seriously thought about that. It was like 22 degrees that day, and I was freezing to death, and I really didn't want to stay. And I thought, well, I'll just throw it up in the air. And I thought, those people will throw me on the ground and put my arm behind my back and put me in a paddy wagon and send me out of here. I didn't want to do anything that would give them the opinion that I was one of those people who was going to get to him no matter what. So that's why I didn't do that. I really did consider it, though. I really did consider it. That's true.
Can you tell us about when Dee got the Boot Award?
Yes, Dee got the Golden Boot Award. He was lying in a hospital at the end of his life, and Bill Campbell came in and said, Dee, we would like to give you the Golden Boot Award, and that is an award for the westerns he was in. And Dee teared up. He said, I have been dreaming of that award. I think he wanted that more than he wanted, I mean, he'd already had the accolades and the love of Star Trek, but he hadn't had really any acknowledgement for his westerns, and it was like the highlight of, his award-winning thing. He was just tickled pink.
With DeForest and Carolyn, did you, in a way, have two sets of parents?
You know what? I believe I did. Belatedly, I believe I did. Terry Rio, who did Dee's bio, said to me, and made me cry, we were sitting in a restaurant, and she said, you realize you were Dee and Carolyn's daughter, don't you? And I started to cry, and I said, no, don't say that, because if you say that, I didn't do enough for them if that's the case. And she says, you did absolutely everything they asked and everything they would allow, didn't you? And I went, yeah. And she goes, you were the daughter they never had. And I look back on it now and I realize after writing the book, I was always so astounded that they'd even, welcome me into their homes and their lives. I felt like a really, really lucky fan. I didn't realize that I had truly become embraced and become a true friend to them until he fell ill and he said, I'd really like it if you would, come now into my life. Carolyn had fallen and broken her leg and was already in the hospital. Dee was in a hospital at the end of his life, and he asked me to come in and help him wrap up loose ends and to be his, personal assistant and caregiver at the end of his life. And that was my first inclination that, oh my gosh, they really, really trust me. They really do. And to have somebody invite you in, not to live with you, but to die with you, that showed me that they really did have extreme trust in not only in my abilities but in my ability to do that. And I had gone through it with my mother with her brain cancer like 8 months before that, so they knew I could do it, that it wouldn't kill me, and that I could be a strong advocate for them. So it really was when Terry told me that I went, oh my gosh, you might be right about that. I mean, I hate to claim that for myself, but it seemed pretty obvious to people who were outside of me that that's the way it was. So, I mean, I'm honored if that's the way it was. I'm just going to have to ask him when I get to heaven if that's really the way it was. Maybe I'm insecure, but I just like, why? How could that have been possible? But when I look back at the track record, it's like, yeah, read the book. It'll just blow you away.
I think their trust was well placed.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Don't make me cry now. Let's yeah, I loved them. They were so amazing human beings. And for me to have that opportunity to pay them back at the end of their life and help them in return. You always say, when somebody's that awesome to you, you always say, well, I'm going to have to pay it forward because there's no way I could ever pay it back. But when they ask for my help at the end of their life, and I'm like, hey, I really can do something to pay it back. So that was huge for me.
It looks like we have time for 1 to 2 more questions.
Okay.
Caitlin, would you like to ask a question?
What was the same about Dr. McCoy and Mr. Kelly, and what was different?
What was alike and what was different? McCoy was more curmudgeonly than Dee. Dee was very gentle, very sweet, very mature. Well, McCoy was mature too, but and I will just say McCoy's quick-temperedness was not a part of Dee's repertoire. I think Dee brought that part from his cowboy days in a way. He had to have something crusty going on. Just this wonderful, awesome, Mr. Rogers type good guy wouldn't have flown very well in Star Trek. He needed an edge. He needed to be fallible. He needed to be somehow human. So nobody's perfect, And he had to give McCoy some imperfections, and he did that by the way we are all imperfect. We lose our temper. We fly off the handle. We do things that we wish we didn't do later down the road. And he had a really good way to be able to do that and still to pull himself back into the McCoy that everybody knew and loved. Said, you know what, I forgive McCoy for being, cruel in that moment, because I might have been cruel in that moment too. Or I forgive McCoy for flying off the handle, because I probably would have too. Especially with Spock, who was so hard trying to deny his humanity, and McCoy wanted him to embrace his humanity because it made him unique, and McCoy was always trying to tweak Spock, and Spock was like, "You're not tweaking me, brother." So, I mean, that's what made Star Trek really exciting, because there was that stuff going on. Mark Lee, if you are there, and Dan Madsen, I mean, can you come in? And I know we're supposed to quit now, but can we go a little longer, Brandon, if there are more?
Yes, whatever you want.
There's an 8-hour limit technically.
An 8-hour limit. Well,
yeah,
I think
cut off after that. So there's no real technical restriction.
I just wonder if Mark B. Lee. I mean, Mark has D stories. Dan Madsen has D stories, and I don't want to take over the whole thing unless they want to do something like this with you later. It's up to you. But if they're there. Please.
Well, they're not in this hangout. They're watching from outside.
Okay.
It sure would be great to get them in here.
Maybe they're looking to see how it turns out, and maybe they'll connect up with us later then.
Well, maybe we can make a regular public. You want to do a public, Todd, later on, or?
I don't know, man. I think that it'd be, and sorry to the viewers or whatever, but I think it's good to keep this in a broadcast fashion, and because I hate to say it, there's a lot of random stuff that happens in public hangouts that,
right?
Especially Caitlin, I think, is not of age, and I don't think exposing her to the public would be a good idea.
Okay.
Thanks, Todd.
Yes, sir.
Kristine's books, for those who are watching, are on Amazon.com. They are also in the file section of my Facebook group in memory and honor of DeForest Kelley. I appreciate your time, Kristine, and
thank you. I appreciate yours.
And I thank for everybody watching the Hangout on air on YouTube and Google Plus. And when I stop the broadcast, the ones that's in the Hangout, just stay where you're at for a minute. Again, thank you for watching.